of splintered glass still in it. From the evidence, it appeared that Aunt Matilda had either been trying to hang the picture where it belonged, or taking it down, and it had slipped out of her hands and fallen, and she had hidden it behind the drape and hastily swept up the broken glass. But why? Even granting that Aunt Matilda might behave in such an erratic fashion, which was obvious from the evidence, I couldn't imagine a sensible reason. It occurred to me facetiously that she might have gone in for pictures of muscle men, and seeing me coming up the street, she had rushed them into hiding and brought out the old pictures. That could account for the evidence, except for one thing. I hadn't dallied. She could not possibly have seen me earlier than 60 seconds before I came up the front walk. Still, the telegrapher at the depot could have called her and told her I was here when he saw me get off the train. I shrugged the matter off and went to the guest room. It, too, was the same as always, except for one thing. A picture. It was a color photograph of the church, taken from the street. The picture was in a frame, but without glass hanging over it, and was about 18 inches wide and 30 high. It was a very good picture, very lifelike. There was a car parked at the curb in front of the church, and someone inside the car smoking a cigarette. And it was so real, I would have sworn I could see the streamer of smoke rising from the cigarette moving. The odor of good food came from the kitchen, reminding me to get busy. I opened my two-suiter and took out my toilet kit and went to the bathroom. I shaved, brushed my teeth, combed my hair. Afterwards, I popped into my room just for a second to put my toilet kit on the dresser and hurried to the dining room. Something nagged at the back of my mind all the time I was eating. After dinner, Aunt Matilda suggested I'd better get some sleep. I couldn't argue. I was already asleep on my feet. Her fried chicken and creamed gravy and mashed potatoes had been an opiate. I didn't even bother to hang up my clothes. I slipped into the heaven of comfort of the bed and closed my eyes, and the next minute it was morning. Getting out of bed, I stopped in mid-motion. The picture of the church was no longer on the wall, and as I stared at the blank spot where it had been, the thing that nagged me during dinner last night finally leaped into consciousness. When I had dashed into the room and out again last night on the way to the dining room, I had glanced briefly at the picture, and something had been different about it. Now I knew what had been different. The car had no longer been in front of the church. I lit a cigarette and sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about that picture and simply could not bring myself to believe the accuracy of that fleeting impression. Aunt Matilda had slipped into my room and removed the picture while I slept. That was obvious. Why had she done that? The fleeting impression that I couldn't be positive about would give her a sensible reason. I studied my memory of that picture as I had closely studied it. It had been a remarkable picture. The more I recalled its details, the more remarkable it became. I couldn't remember any surface gloss or graining to it, but of course, I had not been looking for such things. Only an expert photographer would notice or recognize such technical details. My thoughts turned in the direction of Aunt Matilda and her telegram. Her source of income, I knew, was her part of the estate of my grandfather and amounted to something like $30,000. I knew that she was terrified of touching 1 cent of the capital and lived well within the income from good, sound stocks. I took her telegram out of the pocket of my coat, which was hanging over the back of a chair. Come at once. Stop. Am in terrible trouble. The only kind of terrible trouble Matilda could be in was if some swindler talked her out of some of her capital, and that definitely would not be easy to do. I grinned to myself at the recollection of her worrying herself sick over what would happen to her if there was a revolution and the new government refused to honor the old government bonds. Things began to make sense. Her telegram. Then those pictures moved around in the front room, and the one she had forgotten to hide in the guest room. If the other pictures were anything like it, I could see how Aunt Matilda might cash in on part of her securities to invest in what she thought was a sure thing. But sure things are only as good as the people in control of them. Many a sure thing has been lost to the original investors by stupid decisions leading to bankruptcy, and Many a seemingly sure thing has fleeced a lot of innocent victims. Slowly, as I thought it out, I became sure that that was what had happened. Then why Aunt Matilda's about-face, hiding the pictures and telling me to go back to Chicago? Had she threatened whoever was behind this and gotten her money back? Or had she become convinced that her financial venture was sound? In either case, why was she trying to keep me from knowing about the pictures? I made up my mind. Whether Aunt Matilda liked it or not, I was going to stay until I got to the bottom of things. What Aunt Matilda evidently didn't realize was that no inventor who really had something would waste time trying to find backing in a place like Sumac. Getting dressed, I decided that first on the agenda would be to find where Aunt Matilda had hidden those pictures and to get a good look at them. That was simpler than I expected it to be. When I came out of my room, I stuck my head in the kitchen doorway and said good morning to her, and she leaped to her feet to get some breakfast ready for me. It was obvious that she was anxious to get me fed and out of the house. Then I simply took the 2 steps past the bathroom door to the door to her bedroom and went in. The pictures were stacked against the side of her dresser. The one of the church was the first one. It was on its side. With a silent whistle of amazement, I bent down to watch it. The car was not parked at the curb in it, but there were several children walking along, obviously on their way to school. And they were walking, moving. I picked up the picture. It was as heavy as it should be, but not more. A faint whisper of sound seemed to come from it. I put my ear closer and heard the children's voices. I explored with my ear close to the surface and found that the voices were loudest when my ear was closest to the one talking, as though the voices came out of the picture directly from the images. All it needed to be perfect was a volume control somewhere. I searched and found it behind the upper right corner of the picture. I twisted it very slowly, and the voices became louder. I turned it back to the position it had been in. The next picture was of the railroad depot. The telegrapher and baggage clerk were going around the side of the depot towards the tracks. A freight train was rushing through the picture. Even as I watched it in the picture, I heard the wail of a train whistle in the distance. And it was coming from outside across town. That freight train was going through town right now. I put the pictures back the way they had been and stole softly from Aunt Matilda's bedroom to the bathroom and closed the door. No wonder Aunt Matilda invested in this thing, I said to my image in the mirror as I shaved. Picture TV would make all other TV receivers obsolete. Color TV at that. And some new principle in stereophonic sound. What about the fact that neither picture had been plugged into an outlet, probably run by batteries? What about the lack of weight? Obviously a new TV principle was involved. Maybe it required fewer circuits and less power. What about the broadcasting end, the cameras? Permanently set up? What about the broadcast channels? There had been 10 or 12 pictures. I had only looked at 2. Was each a different scene? 12 different broadcasting stations in Sumac? It had me dizzy. Probably the new TV principle was so simple that all that could be taken care of without millions of dollars worth of equipment. A new respect for Aunt Matilda grew in me. She had latched onto a moneymaker. It didn't hurt to know that I was her favorite nephew either. With my PhD in physics and my aunt as one of the stockholders, I could probably land a good job with the company. What a deal! By the time I finished shaving, I was whistling. I was still whistling when I went into the kitchen for breakfast. "You'll have to hurry, Arthur," Aunt Matilda said. "Your train leaves in 45 minutes. "I'm not leaving," I said cheerfully. I went over to the bright breakfast nook and sat down and took a cautious sip of coffee. I grunted my approval of it and looked around toward Aunt Matilda, smiling. She was staring at me with wide eyes. She looked as haggard as though she had just heard she had a week to live. "But you must go," she croaked, as though not going were unthinkable. "Nonsense, you old fox," I said. "I know a good thing as well as you do." I want to get a job with that outfit." She came toward me with a